I'm Enrica Dall'Ara.
And I'm Melanie Kloetzel, and we are going to present a paper called Landscape in Motion, Score Maps, Design Processes, and Choreographic Creation.
This presentation addresses a current project, Landscape in Motion, which is conceived as a creative research in the fields of landscape design and performing digital arts.
Through an interdisciplinary approach, the project aims to develop a new site-sensitive methodology that honors cultural, aesthetic, and environmental heritage in both urban renewal design processes and in site-based arts.
This project focuses on the infrastructures and industrial area in the richly layered neighborhoods of Ramsay and Inglewood in Calgary, Alberta, in Canada.
These areas were the subject of landscape analysis and design within a landscape architecture studio course taught by Enrica Dall'Ara at the University of Calgary in 2018 and 2019. The investigative and mapping processes that emerged from this course inspired the further research work that we describe here.
The Ramsay and Inglewood neighborhoods boast complex interfaces between the city center, rivers, cultural heritage sites, mobility infrastructure, industrial sites, brownfield, and vacant lands. The area is also crossed by the Canadian Pacific Railway, CPR, historical infrastructure with a significant symbolism, but controversial value due to the fact that it is representative of how European settlements impacted places of great importance for indigenous people. The frequent, lasting metallic noise of the CPR trains constantly recalls this contentious history. Mixed land use, mostly residential, commercial, and industrial, and related diverse urban tissues create a peculiar landscape made of contrast, frictions, and disorientations. But it also one that offers much to fascinate both designers and residents.
At present, the implementation of city plans in Calgary includes the imminent construction of a new LRT line that will radically alter the Ramsay and Inglewood area. The city considers this infrastructure as both an evolution of the transit system and a platform for development. This impending, and indeed already in process, transformation drove Enrica to seek out innovative ways to both preserve and highlight the cultural heritage of Ramsay and Inglewood, while also developing a methodological process that might be applied to other urban renewal endeavors. To enact this investigation, Enrica approached me and asked if I would be interested in collaborating on a landscape design project that would explore the current landscape of Inglewood and Ramsay from the perspective of artistic inquiry on a human bodily scale. Thus, the project Landscape in Motion was born. This presentation will focus on the processes of, first, developing a methodology for the project, and second, defining a lexicon for the key output of score maps, an annotation system that serves as a means to inform both landscape design and choreographic creation processes.
Landscape in Motion acts as an interdisciplinary investigation into the relationship between major urban infrastructures and the human scale. In particular, the project takes as a premise that urban infrastructures and their hardscapes can be reimagined as cultural and/or green infrastructures through the mechanism of the human body.
Within the project, the body, and more specifically movement and dance, acts as a measuring and perceptual tool to highlight and evaluate the potential of urban infrastructures for their environmental and social value. The artistic expression serves as a poetics for both site investigation and recording, and is particularly inspired by land art and other site-based artistic efforts.
One contribution that has been critical to our project is the well-known intersection of landscape design and choreography by American landscape architect Lawrence Halprin and dancer choreographer Anna Halprin, his wife. In particular, the Halprin's notation drawings have been significant as they translated notational systems for dance landscape interactions into diagrammatic representations, which functioned to document, direct, and depict movement through space over time. Pondering on their pioneering efforts, we wondered if we could build on such an approach to effect more sensitive inquiries into the cultural and perceptual values of urban landscapes in the face of aggressive urban revitalization efforts. As such, we embarked on a project that would examine existing urban landscapes using both spatial data, mapping, and experiential activities, on-site surveys, and site-specific physical and aural performance methods, in order to develop specific creative outputs, including digital landscape representation, score maps to influence landscape design and choreographic creation, dance films, a documentary of the process, and landscape meta-design for the site. The goal is for these outputs to be interactively linked to each other and available through an online platform.
Background research for the project began through student mapping and design projects in Enrica's Landscape Architecture Studio course. In particular, the analysis phase included an investigation of Inglewood and Ramsey using methods that Enrica has been developing for several years through her professional work, research, and pedagogy. These methods emphasize the role of both structural and morphological systems and components related to cultural, perceptual, and symbolic values.
The main objective has been to interpret through landscape analysis and design both the structures of the landscape and its ephemeral or intangible conditions. Borrowing from the Landscape Architecture Studio's work, Melanie and I began making multiple journeys through the neighborhoods, focusing on both cultural and phenomenological properties of the areas.
These walks, which narrowed down the options for physical investigation, figured as critical for the project's development in order to ensure a depth of analysis of particular sites, as well as for addressing the smaller scale of the human body within the grander scale of the neighborhood as a whole. As potential sites began to emerge, including a neighborhood park, Jeffries Park in Ramsey, a marginalized space adjacent to the rail tracks nearby the Ramsey Design Center, hosted in a historic building, and a courtyard of the oldest brewery in Inglewood, a series of questions also began to surface.
How should we address the different scales of the project? How could the four-dimensional nature of lived and danced experience be translated into mapping? What combination of viewing would support the process? How can we ensure that our notation integrates physical characteristics of space and non-physical characteristics such as images, impressions, meanings, or experiences?
What kind of mapping would be possible for dancers to enact to support the intended score map? And critically, how could mapping and language in both design and dance be used in a way that would not reenact colonial imperatives? Cognizant, in particular, of these colonialist erasures and assumptions within mapping practices, and aiming at emphasizing the role of time in defining both the palimpsest of the site and the human cognitive experience of it, Enrica and I started to employ the term experiential archaeology to help frame the upcoming mapping endeavor. As an idea, we thought of experiential archaeology as a way to highlight the personal and experiential nature of being in place, while also bringing into play concepts developed within critical cartography, landscape architecture theory, site-specific performance theory, and dance studies, in order to ensure the inclusion of diverse bodies that have traversed a site over time.
From the site-specific dance perspective, Melanie framed the mapping project for the dance members of the research team around her recent anthology, Site Dance, co-edited with Caroline Pavlik, that lays out four main concerns within site-specific performance: history, phenomenological and physical interactivity, aesthetics, and community relationships.
Thus, as the project progressed into the mapping phase, the dance portion of the team began to conceptualize its on-site exploration around these four main areas. Specifically, the idea of experiential archaeology allowed the dancers to combine their deepening knowledge and impressions of the individual places through iterative experience with what I started calling a light Flanneus-style engagement that prioritized diverse experiences of a site across both time and a diversity of bodies. For their first visit to each individual site, Enrica and I purposely withheld information from the dance researchers in order to glean their first impressions of the place. Inevitably, this first effort focused on the physical components of the site, although due to the site-specific performance training undergone by the students, their impressions were often quite diverse in terms of sensory input, i.e. discussions of sound and smell in particular stood out as critical components alongside visual and aesthetic elements. Yet the dance section of the team almost immediately leaped into a second mapping phase, prioritizing a physical and phenomenological engagement with the site. Mapping such engagement via a focus on action terminology that arose from improvisational interactions, each dancer crafted a, quote, environmental dialogues map that began to offer suggestions as to what might be critical to include in the upcoming score maps.
While the dancers focused on their personal experiences of sight, the landscape architecture team embraced the concept that double glances should be fostered in a cross-scalar way. A small-scale glance at proximity and detail, and a large-scale glance at the landscape systems and scenery. The need for an in-depth investigation into the historical evolution of the site also emerged as critical, as we wanted to interpret and represent simultaneously both space and time, key markers of analysis with both disciplines. Accordingly, the landscape architecture team developed a series of maps that emphasize key historical periods, including present day, and infrastructure of the area. These maps were layered into an axonometric representation integrated with the timeline. By complementing the maps with perspective views of the site, viewer can gain a more immediate understanding of the environment's features. Specifically, within the perspective views, landscape components such as historic buildings, historic infrastructures, and vegetation systems were highlighted as protagonists. These landscape representations and information were shared with the entire team, a key step that allowed the dance researchers to recognize significant moments in the area's history, as well as infrastructural and other physical changes over time.
To add to these insights, the whole team was able to join with 2 Ramsey residents, also consultants for the project, in order to glean a deeper understanding of the sites from the community perspective. The sessions with the landscape architecture team and with community members greatly influenced the experiential archaeology for the dance researchers, allowing the next period of fieldwork to unfold via an altered perspective on the sites. For the final 2 steps, creating historical maps and community maps, the dance research team used the, quote, light flanus approach to consider what kind of movement and sensory experiences might have been readily or frequently experienced by a diversity of Ramsey or Inglewood residents at each site. In the community-focused mapping, age range stood out as critical based on the personal narratives we heard, prompting the dance researchers to adopt different age, quote, lenses for their mapping. As an additional step to support the fieldwork, we also arranged for a session with team member Mary Ellen Tyler, a landscape ecologist, so that the whole research team could be informed by, quote, more than human concepts around plant and animal ecology. Compiling and synthesizing all this information, historical, ecological, physical, improvisational, community, and aesthetic insights, the dance research team then created comprehensive, action-oriented maps that could function as a critical base for the development of the final score maps by the design team.
In order to create relevant and applicable content representation within the score maps for both dance and landscape architecture, the team focused on terminology and concepts that are significant for both disciplines, individually and integratively. To start, we reflected on our principal intentions for linking the fields of landscape design and site-specific dance, specifically analyzing and beneficially impacting the way we interact with and live in the urban environment, life in the landscape. Aspects of this analysis include 1. Emphasizing the key role of cognitive experiences, sensory impressions, and sense of place for affecting our relationship to place. 2. Deciphering and dialoguing with the atmosphere of the place. 3. Fostering a respectful and meaningful human-environment relationship. And finally, exploring the inter-interactions as a key critical element, as the relationship and action of the dancer with the site offers a baseline for further analysis.
By focusing on these crossover areas of concern, we are currently defining beneficial and, more importantly, legible score map legends and diagrammatic content that can lead to further development in both fields. In short, we are aiming for score maps that can foster, first, landscape meta-design and compositional meta-design, Second, landscape design and choreography. And finally, built design and site-based dance performance. As intra actions are the fundamental component of our investigation into the human-environment relationship, the score maps prioritize annotations that specify key actions by the dancers, as well as refer to the quality of these actions. Along with stating these basic actions and qualities via text, the score maps delve into space and time as essential dimensions for both disciplines.
For example, spatial information includes essential components such as urban fabric, circulation infrastructures, topography, vegetation patterns, and water bodies. These are then integrated with annotations regarding human interactions with the environment, specifically such choreographic inputs as background-foreground, kinesphere, pathway, level, and facing. The time dimension poses different challenges. In the same way that we are finding ways to represent the more minute human body scale and size of the neighborhood scale, we are also attempting to illustrate the longer-term temporal aspects of landscape processes alongside the much shorter temporal experience of human movement. As such, we are experimenting with offering a series of images that can show landscape processes as well as a focus on time-based choreographic ideas such as rhythm, tempo pattern, syncopation, and stillness.
To address the complexity of the project, we have found that hybrid representation techniques, as well as composite and multimedia score mapping, offer the best potential. This approach arose as a consequence of our intention to develop an annotation system whose iconography is both expressive and immediate to read.
Thus, we opted for three-dimensional score maps that use 3D models as a working tool to structure the skeleton of spatial information. Combining multiple views allows for different and complementary information. The plan view acts as an overview of the main spatial organization of landscape components, bodies, actions, and movement pathways, while the perspective view more powerfully expresses the scenery and the atmosphere of the place, with an emphasis on human experience and perception. Of critical importance, the perspective view is also a kind of representation through which the score map expresses its potential to prefigure design concepts and scenarios, as well as choreographic presentation tactics, particularly with regard to foreground-background and sequential structure. As a first level of coding, components that play the role of codes or symbols are represented in color or by means of a photographic collage for emphasis. Conversely, the elements that serve as the neutral basis are in black and white, traced through simple wireframes. The color coding we adopted to distinguish significant historical periods during the landscape analysis phase has been used throughout the process of crafting the score maps. Beyond this main structure of the score maps, we are exploring how call-out drawings derived from the plan view and/or perspective view can allow us to change scale, for instance from the side scale to the body scale, and multiply the possibility to add more detailed information. We are also addressing the challenge of representing choreographic sequence and theme by a series of interrelated perspective views that use a keyframes method. This is a strategy that could show transition between actions, transition between different landscape conditions or landscape processes, example given seasons, weather-related changes, different times during the day, etc., and different thematic concepts within the choreography, example given different age lenses or historical periods.
While the crafting of both the methodology and the score maps are still underway, we're excited about the process and its prospects. We are aiming for a methodology and an annotation system that could be used by other artists, designers, and scholars. At the same time, our approach is experimental and experiential and often improvisational, preserving the capacity for others to adapt the methodology to their own iterative experiences at a diversity of sites. As these art and design processes inform and influence one another, we glimpse a model of the human-place interaction that can expand our awareness of and connection to the urban landscapes that surround us.
Thank you for listening.
Feel free to contact us with any questions at the email addresses listed on the slide.